In this unit, we're going to focus on a set of skills that in essence are the most valuable skills that a negotiator needs to pack into his or her toolbox and take with them to any negotiation. And I'm talking, of course, about communication skills. Communication is at the core of any negotiation process. When we can get something we need or want on our own, when we can go and take it off a shelf, then we don't need to interact with others, and as a result, we don't need to negotiate with them, we don't need to communicate with them. However, when we do need something from somebody else, and we need to engage with them in a negotiation process in order to get it, the primary mode of interaction that occurs between us is a communication interaction. So understanding how interpersonal communication works and what are the various tools that you can use in order to make a conversation constructive or unconstructive is perhaps the most valuable set of skills that a negotiator can have. Sounds simple, right? Well, as a colleague of mine, Bernie Mayer at the Werner Institute, often writes, humans are imperfect communicators. And boy, that's just how it is. He sure has got that right. And you know, he's no better than anyone else, and neither am I. Let's take a look, for example, at a scene that happened when I went up to him today to complain about some noise that he and his family are making, which is driving me crazy. I went up to him last night, I tried to talk to him, he slammed the door on me. I went up today to try and work it out with him again. This time, we actually sat down and had somewhat of a conversation, but man, that wasn't easy. And remember, humans are imperfect communicators. Well, I mean, thanks for letting me in this time. Not like last night when you slammed the freaking door in my face. Listen,
you came up here so rudely last night.
Forget last night. Listen. We have got to talk. Your dog is barking and is driving me freaking crazy. And you have got to, I don't know, shut it up, and muzzle it.
Your theater sound system that we're hearing all these noises late at night that are setting my dog off.
What are you
making it hard
about?
for
It's
my
not
kids.
setting your dogs
Making it hard for my kids to sleep.
Don't get me started on your kids.
And then when every time they go downstairs, they have to pass by the garbage you put in the hall. I don't know what kind of place you think this is. You leave your garbage sitting right there in the hall, and my kids go right through it.
That you are going to make up all this stuff just in order to avoid someone coming upstairs talking to you about a problem that needs fixing. That is your dog. The dog needs to be shut up.
Fixed.
The dog needs to be shut up. Okay, keep the dog quiet. It's driving me crazy. Okay.
All right, so you come in. Have you told me that now? Have you said what you needed to say?
Yes, I have.
And are you going to say you're going to fix your television set? Are you going to fix your entertainment system? Are you going to fix the garbage in the hall?
Are you going to fix your kids? Are you going to fix your dog? Is this?
What are you talking about?
Are you going to fix conversation?
So now you're telling me you want me to do something to my kids?
Forget it. You know what? Forget it. I don't want to talk about this anymore.
That works for me.
How can we get much better as communicators in a negotiation setting? So as with everything that we're learning in this course, there are basically two parts to that. The first is to understand on a fundamental level what is going on, how does this work, what does this interaction look like. And the second part of it is to learn specific tools that will help us to cope within this what is going on and have more control over what is going on. Let's start with the first part. On a very fundamental level, what is going on? What happens in communication? In order to start to help clarify it, let's talk about a communication loop between a sender and a receiver, a transmitter and a receiver, all sorts of terms from communications theory that we'll use somewhat interchangeably. So, if it were all just as simple as this, as message sent, message received, then we wouldn't need to be having this unit. Everything would be fine. You would say something, it would be understood in exactly the same way on the other side, and everything would be perfectly clear. However, we all know from our own experiences that we have those situations where we had one thing in mind and we tried to convey it to the other and we were hoping that they would wind up with with the same thing in mind. However, what happened in reality is that we had one thing in mind and tried to convey it to the other, and they wound up with quite a different thing in mind. And that's where we have these conversations where we think they're about apples, the other thinks that they're about oranges. So what we have, in essence, in a communication process are two people who are trying to communicate, but they're facing challenges. And those challenges, I mean, it really seems like there's this gap between communicators, between transmitters and receivers. And we have different tools that we use in this transmission and reception process, but they're not always enough, because sometimes that gap is really pretty big. So, one of the things that we're going to need to understand is what exactly is that gap, and why might our usual tools not be sufficient to always overcome it, or to ensure that we're always able to overcome it, and how might we repack our toolbox in a way that is cognizant that there is that gap, and that we need to bridge that gap somehow, and that and perform better in closing that communication loop on all sides, and making sure that what we try to transmit is what is indeed being received on the other side. So, in order to do that, we need to understand on a basic level that negotiation is a process in which it involves a sender, it involves a receiver, but we also need to take into account the channel between the sender and the receiver. Okay? So messages are traveling across that channel. In a spoken conversation, face to face, the channel seems to be the words that are spoken. I'm saying something and you on the other side are hearing it. But we know that that's not all, that there are other elements, that there are my facial expressions, my body language, my tone of voice, and we will discuss all that later on. But for now, let's just talk about this channel between you and us, you and me, that is connecting, and the messages flowing between the sender-transmitter and the hearer-receiver on the other side travels through a certain channel. To make this just a little more complex, we'll add on that there are two channels that are open at the same time. Because at the very same time that I am sending information through the channel to the receiver is also sending back a message through another channel. And that channel, which we call the feedback channel, is a channel that conveys, well, two things. One is that it conveys whatever messages that the other party has that they want to send back to us. But let's set their opinion and message aside. Even when I'm speaking as a sender, the transmitter is also sending back, through that feedback channel, is also sending back a message of, I'm listening, I'm with you, I hear you, I get what you're saying. Or conversely, what? I don't get it, what are you talking about? I can't hear you. And all of these subtle messages that have to do not so much with the content of what I'm saying, but more with the process of communication. Is the other party hearing me? Is the other party understanding? Am I being clear? Does the other party want to hear more? Would the other party just like me to shut up and start listening to them? And all of that kind of subtextual, unspoken, but sometimes very obvious communication is happening through this other part, which we call the feedback channel or the feedback loop. Now, let's make this even a bit more complex. So, we now understand that there is a sender and a receiver. Communication happens through this channel. Okay? As communication is happening through this channel, another couple of processes are happening. The first is that the way I choose to convey my message involves what we call encoding on my part. I choose whatever words and tone of voice and facial expressions and length of speech or whatever it is that I want to use in order to convey whatever idea it is that I'm trying to convey, which might be, I will give you $5,000 for the car, or tell your kids to stop making so much noise in the hall, and so on. The words that I spoke, I have this picture in my mind of what I want to see happening, and I encode it into a message that I convey through the channel to the other side. Okay, so that's the transmitter's encoding. Of course, on the receiver side, a process of decoding needs to happen. When the other party hears my words, hears my tone of voice, sees my body language, they decode that and understand through the prism of their decoding, understand whatever message it is that they understand. Now, in a perfect world, remember that first picture we saw, message sent, message received. But I think obviously both from our own experience and from the way we've shown this more complex communication loop, obviously if I have an idea in mind and I encode it and I send it through some channel which we know straight out is not going to be a perfect channel. You might not hear every word I said, you might not understand every word I said, you might not understand every word I said in the way I meant to say it. I may not have chosen the perfect words in order to convey my idea. So somewhere in that encoding and decoding process, things might get lost, and things do get lost. And a lot of the conflict-related feelings that we sense throughout negotiation processes often have to do with the fact that, once again, that humans are imperfect communicators because we never have this perfect meeting of the message sent, message received, as if we're sending electrical transmissions from my mind to yours, and the picture that I see in my mind, you then see in your mind. Okay? Now, to make this even more complex and to show a full picture of what is going on through the communications process, let's show one final, more comprehensive view of this communication loop. Okay? So in this way of looking at things, we have the transmitter, or here it's called a source. Okay, so we have the source of a message. The message is encoded through whatever language and tone and body language the source transmitter chooses to encode it through. It is shot through the channel, okay? And in that channel, it goes through what in communications theory is called simply noise. And that noise has to do with the way the channel affects things. So you're not hearing all my words, you're not watching all my body language, you're not, our realms of experience in understanding words and tones and emotional expressions and body language are simply not the same, so we're viewing things with very, very different sets of filters on either side of that communication channel, and the communication channel is distorting it. Okay? So there's kind of internal noise in the communication system, and once I have encoded and shot it down through the noise over to the other party or the receiver, the other party intakes it, receives it through a decoding process in which the message undergoes intake and understanding, and once again it is subject to that kind of subjective decoding that also easily causes misinterpretations, misconstructions, and just misunderstandings. So you never have this perfect outcome of what I intended is what you actually understand in the end. Finally, the receiver sends back, as the source is talking, the receiver is sending back, closing the feedback loop through positive or negative or vague messages of, yes, I understand you, I'm with you, I'm listening to you, keep on talking, or negative, don't tell me that stuff, I don't want to listen, I don't want it, and kind of rejecting, or just what, I don't understand, vagueness, or just nothing at all, being inscrutable. And that feedback loop is returning to the source and affecting the way the source continues to speak, including their decision to continue to speak or not to continue to speak, to share more information or not to share more information. Now, at the end of that loop, once the information has gone all the way across and that feedback, that micro-feedback has been received, at some point, we switch roles. The receiver says, okay, to themselves, okay, my turn to talk now. Sometimes, of course, they don't wait till the end and just jump in the middle. But even assuming that they have waited, they have heard, so one party has transmitted, encoded, channel, filters and noise, decoded, received on the other side, the receiver then turns into the transmitter, and the whole loop starts once again. I think that this explanation of how a communication loop works is an explanation unto itself of just how challenging it is to have a constructive conversation, and that's in the abstract. Now, throw in that we're trying to have a constructive conversation about something that might really be bothering us, or something that we really want the other party to do and they don't want to do, which is the essence of many negotiation communications. And I think that we can all see how communication is such a challenging thing to do in negotiation. What we're going to learn throughout the rest of this unit is how to use our communication tools in a very intentional and conscious manner in order to affect the conversation loop and do all we can to make it be a communication loop that works. That means that the messages that I transmit to the other are as close to my intention, are received on the other side, as close to my original intentions as possible. And conversely, to make sure that I understand the other party just as they want to be understood, because I need to know what they're telling me or I won't be able to figure out how to work with them. Now, just to add on one final challenge, is that we might be working with someone who has not taken this course, or has not taken any other course on how communication works and how on communication in negotiation processes is so crucial. So we might find ourselves in a situation where we need to be extra mindful and take some sort of responsibility for making the entire communication loop work. Whether we are the sender or the receiver, we are going to need to make this loop, this back and forth, work, and to do our best to enable that complete process, even though it might be intuitive to say, well, we'll do 50%, but they're going to need to do 50%. That's not enough. To be very skilled negotiation communicators, we're going to have to do some of that facilitation of communication work for the other party as well. Of course, don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about making concessions on the substance of the negotiation in any way. But I am saying that when we are mindful of how communication works in negotiation, we are going to do our best to be mindful of the entire process of what's going on our side and what's going on the other side, and do our best to make sure that whole system works well. The huge benefit in doing so for us is that the more we are mindful of the entire conversation, the entire communication pattern, the more likely it is that we will be able, at some point, to navigate and guide the communication process to lead towards a type of conversation that hopefully will lead towards a type of outcome that is beneficial to us. By taking responsibility for the entire feedback loop, we will be able to make sure that if the conversation seems to be going in a way that is not beneficial to us, we will be able, using communication tools, to regain control of the path that the communication is going and use it to shunt, guide, rechannel the communication back towards a place that is more beneficial to us from a negotiation perspective. So if we find ourselves talking about a topic that we really don't want to talk about, taking charge, managing the entire communication process will allow us to choose not to spend so much time on that topic, but rather spend more time on other topics. If the conversation is going in an unconstructive fighting path, and we think that we need to work together with the other party in order to reach a beneficial outcome, we will be able to use these communication tools to re-guide the communication process back onto a more constructive path, and thereby have a constructive negotiation that will hopefully lead us to a good outcome for ourselves. That is the purpose of this unit. Now that we understand how communication between people happens on a fundamental level, let's look at negotiation. In negotiation, as we've said, people use communication for all sorts of things. Communication is the way through which we try to persuade, it's the way through which we learn information from the other party, it's the way through which we share our own opinions and thought and interest, it's the way in which we engage in bargaining. It is that primary tool. Now, when you unpack it, you're not just using one tool, communication. What you are actually doing is you're using a fairly wide array of separate tools that you use at different points throughout the process. In this unit, we are going to study, learn, and put in our toolbox 5 very fundamental communication tools that will serve you well as a negotiator. We're going to learn them each separately, one by one, and along the way, we're also going to learn how to use them in conjunction with one another for maximum effect in your negotiation communication. We'll go through those one by one at length, but just to put their names up so you recognize them when we get to them in this unit, we're going to start off with listening, and then we'll move on to the second tool of reflecting. The third tool is a tool called reframing. The fourth is a tool called iMessaging. And the fifth and final tool that we will learn to use is the tool of questions and their use in negotiation. So, that's the order of the day. That's what we're going to do for the rest of this unit. Let's get started. The first tool we're going to learn to use as communicators in negotiation is the tool of listening. Why listening? Why not projecting and transmitting and saying what we want? Well, quite simply, I have the feeling that many of us have at some point been exposed in life to either lessons or sermons or discussions about how to say what you want. Okay? We have debating clubs, and we have politics to watch, and we have the news, and we have interviews, and we have all sorts of scenes in which we view people orating. But there's no Best Listener of the Year award. And this tool is such a powerful tool to use in negotiation that I want to spotlight it and start off with it as the most basic fundamental thing that you can do in order to manage this communication loop. Why is it so crucial? Why is such an important skill? Well, quite simply, the first thing that you can look at in order to understand why this tool of listening is so important is just to picture in your mind and consider how people feel when they are being listened to and how people feel when they are not being listened to. And this question of how people feel is a critical question in negotiation because it cuts right down to the question of, will they therefore cooperate with you? Will they build a relationship with you? Will they work with you? So even if you're considering a negotiation in a non-touchy-feely arena, okay, you're considering a business negotiation, the question of how your counterpart feels and how your counterpart connects with you is crucial. We can't pretend that it's not and hope that that issue will go away. So a lot of what we will be studying in communication skills in general is how to connect to the other party, and what better place to start than listening. And in order to get a full picture of this, we need to understand how people feel and how people react when they feel that they are not being listened to. So to get a picture for that, let's take a look at Teresa, who's trying to tell me a story that is of some importance to her, but she's not finding a good listener on the other side. And let's see what that does.
I got so aggravated earlier this week. I'm trying to line up textbooks for all the courses in our summer program. And we have courses that begin each week over the summer term. And it was a Monday, the first class of the term of a particular course in our program. And just because I had an uneasy feeling in my gut, I walked over to the university bookstore to see if the books that are required for this class.
Oh, is
were in
that the
stock.
place where they sell all the Blue Jay stuff?
Yeah.
The place under the.
Yeah.
I know that stuff.
Yeah. So I go
They
downstairs.
ripped me off once. I was just a couple of weeks ago. They ripped me off.
No,
It
it's
was
just this. Well, this happened to me just last week.
okay.
So I go walking over there. I go all the way downstairs to look for the bookstore manager. And I walk to the shelves where books for our master's degree program would normally be shelved, and they're not there. And class starts that night. So I walk all over the store looking for the bookstore manager, can't find her. Walk all the way back to the law school building, go to my office, send her an email, and say, I was just in the bookstore minutes ago, can't find the books for the class that starts tonight. Here's the order confirmation that you sent me just a couple of weeks ago.
You should have sent them an email. You should have gone in there and you just slam your hand down the table and you say, "Hey, can I get some service here?"
That would not be my style. But
yeah, but they can ignore your email and also they're.
they could. But I don't think you might have missed the part where I said I walked over there and went downstairs to find the textbook manager and I couldn't find her.
That's what I'm saying. They're never around, right?
Yeah.
I had that.
Yeah, they're just not around.
It's a, and I had the same thing. I was at Sears, up on Judge. I was at Sears a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
I had exactly the same thing happen. Well, it wasn't exactly the same thing because the manager did show up, but he had no idea what was going on. And anyway, it was just like this inefficient service, and you get it all over the place nowadays. It's nobody to talk to nowadays. Country's going with the dogs.
Yeah. They never ordered the books, by the way.
What books?
Never mind.
It didn't take too much to shut Teresa down, did it? And to be honest, I didn't get that much out of that interaction either. Turnabout is fair play, so I asked Teresa to allow me to tell a story to her about an incident that occurred to me that was of some importance to me, and to see how I would respond to however she'd act. So let's look now at Teresa's listening and how it affected me. So I want to tell you about my flight here to Creighton. My flight to Omaha. It was a nightmare flight. Well, I mean, yeah. It was. I had the middle seat when I was flying through Chicago. I had the middle seat, and they were. They're perfectly normal people, like everything, but they were the worst travelers ever. So, like, without noticing, the girl had her headphones on, and you could hear the music was louder outside of her headphones, was louder than it was on the inside. And the guy sitting next to me, he wasn't even noticing. He was moving his stuff away, and he just kind of put his laptop down in my lap without even noticing if I was at table.
You know what's really funny? I was on a flight one time. Wait, I have to tell you this. I was on a flight one time, and you talk about sitting in the middle seat. You know who I was sitting next to? Who was sitting in the middle seat?
Who?
This is a big new Brzezinski. From the Carter administration?
Yeah, well...
You're probably not old enough to remember him, but I sat right next to him on a flight.
But my mom was old enough to remember him. But anyway, that's the point is... The point is that, at some point I was thinking, do I talk to them? Do I not talk to them? And I wanted to tell the girl, could you turn that down? But then I thought to myself, well, is that being sexist? Why don't you tell the guy, keep your stuff in order? Why are you picking on the girls?
Don't you just have your own headphones so you can just cancel all these people out? I mean, what really?
Yeah, but that's not. Why should I have to retreat into my own space? That wasn't where I was anyway. And no, I didn't.
2014, and that's what people do. I mean, no offense, but that's kind of what people do on planes. So, do your own thing. Right?
Well, I don't know if people are. I'm not saying they were mean people. I'm just saying people are inconsiderate and that they don't always know what's what. They're not looking around. Not looking around you, caring about your effect on the person next to you.
Maybe you were just tired and you just didn't feel like talking. I mean, you could have struck up a conversation. I love to talk to people on airplanes. I get some of the most interesting life stories from people on the plane, and they probably just wanted to do that, with you. So maybe you were too tired to do it this time, and maybe on the way back you'll feel more like getting in the swing of things on the plane, so you can make it a pleasant trip, right?
Yeah. Okay. I guess the best way to summarize that might be, ouch. And why is that ouch important? That ouch is important because, as I said before, the question of how a negotiator feels, quite simply in a negotiation, how they feel, how comfortable they are feeling with the situation, with their counterpart, with the surroundings, and with the communication going on, the question of how they feel is going to affect how they react, how they respond, how they participate. And let's think a little bit about how being heard or not heard, as a result of being listened to or not listened to, how that makes us feel. When we feel as if someone has not been listening to us, we might feel, as we saw in the demonstrations, and I'm sure you've experienced in your own life, we feel angry. We feel hurt. We feel disrespected. Sometimes we feel humiliated or rejected. When we feel heard, on the other hand, when we feel that someone has been listening to us, we feel respected, we feel valued, we feel as if we've been heard, we hear as if there's some sort of empathy has been built and we feel connected to the party who has listened to us. So bringing that into negotiation, by listening to someone, we can give them what might be a somewhat comforting sense of, yes, we are present in this conversation together. I may not agree with what you're saying, but I am valuing the fact that you have something to say. So that bond creates empathy. And through that building of empathy, it creates a better relationship and it creates trust. And those three elements, empathy, relationship, and trust, are invaluable to negotiators. They're not just touchy-feely issues. These are huge strategic goals for negotiators to strive to attain in a negotiation. Very simply because empathy and trust and relationship will translate, should you want it to translate, into cooperation on the substance of the deal, into process cooperation as how we communicate and how we work things out. Are we going to be out to get each other, or are we going to work together and try and figure out together? They create, again, trust, relationship, and empathy. They encourage reciprocation. So if I'm listening to you and you feel listened to, you might very well listen to me. And that might also spill over into the negotiation process in a larger sense. If I do something for you, you will do something for me. If I'm willing to work with you, you will be willing to work with me. And on the basic, most fundamental level, if we have managed to build empathy, relationship, and trust, there's a fairly good chance that we will be able to get the information we need from the other party. If the other party has no sense of empathy, relationship, and or trust, then there's no reason that the other person is going to tell us anything that we need to know. Okay? So this is why I'm focusing so much on this topic of how listening makes us feel, because listening has the power to make negotiators feel very good about what is going on and feel as if a bond is connecting between the negotiators. Taking this back to the communication loop, good listening, therefore, cleans the channel that goes between the transmitter and the receiver. Remember the channel and remember the noise going on. Good listening helps reduce some of the noise that gets built up in the channel. If these are the potential payoffs of good listening, then you might be saying to yourself, okay, so I want to learn how to do that well. And I especially want to learn how to do that well in a negotiation context where listening might not be the same as it is, in a friendly conversation with someone who you like and you like what they're saying. It's not as simple with someone with whom you might have a more complex relationship or no relationship at all, other than the fact that you're asking each other for stuff now. And that perhaps you don't have any previous relationship to build on, and so on and so forth. So, how do we build in that context? How do we become really good listeners? So the first thing to do is to understand that listening is a complex process, and you need to keep a picture of the communication loop in mind in order to remember how to do it well. Remember that the communication loop includes both the main channel and also the feedback channel. Being a good listener, a really excellent listener, includes managing both of those channels at once. And the way to do that, since that requires both receiving, listening is receiving, but also transmitting a message of, I'm listening to you. So this transmitting and receiving at the same time requires really excellent listening skills of the type that we call active listening. It's not enough just to sit and hear what the person is saying. We need to, at the same time, be transmitting back to the other that we're with you and we hear you and we want to hear more and we really want to understand you. So managing both of those in time require that we become not only excellent listeners, but excellent active listeners. And in order to do so, we're going to learn two tools that are both sides or aspects of that loop. And the first is listening, the second is reflecting. So the first tool we're going to use is how we actively listen to someone else. And then the second one is how we make sure that the loop is completed by making sure that we've understood the other and that they get the feeling that we've understood them. Focusing on the listening part of that, okay? So we want to listen, and that means maintaining a lot of focus and not planning a grocery list in our mind at the same time, and not forming counter-arguments in our mind at the same time. So we need some clearing of our mind and really intaking what's going on. However, at the same time we're intaking, we want to somehow send a message back to the other party. I hear you. I'm understanding you. Doing different things that might help to form that trust, empathy, and relationship build up. How do we do that? So, of course this is all contextual. Let's say when I'm listening to my wife and sometimes I want her to know that I'm really with her and I'm really understanding where she is as she tells me this thing, sometimes I might reach over and put my hand on top of hers. Now, you might consider this as a way to complete the communication loop that might be suitable between me and my wife, but might not be suitable between me and a manager with I'm negotiating the price of a unit between our two companies. So the most important thing about active listening is that it needs to be contextually suitable. So everything that we say now, say, well, how would this work in a personal context, in a friendly context, at a workplace context, when working with a stranger, and so on and so forth. But these are all elements that can be at play. So context is important. You need to take into account your body language. Your body language should send a message of, you know, I'm listening to you. I'm with you. So if I would be talking to you and saying, I'm listening. Obviously, that's not sending a very powerful listening message. But if I orient myself towards you, and perhaps don't sit down in my own world, but rather I'm looking and eager to hear what you say. So I'm managing to transmit, to close the communication by transmitting. Give me more. I'm listening. I want to understand you. We're trying, just planting the words in our mind is enough usually to tell our body what to do. We're trying to transmit attentiveness. We're trying to transmit focus, that the person we're listening to you are now the focal point of what is going on. We're completely with you. This means we might use eye contact suitably in order to achieve this message. We don't want to stare someone necessarily in the eyes, but we do want to be with them and make suitable eye contact. It also means that we keep in mind what we don't do. We don't play with our cell phone or jangle our keys as the other person, all sorts of other signs of not being attentive or just being impatient to leave. So you'll start watching your own listening habits and understanding what needs to be worked on, and it's quite easy once you know what to look for to start improving. You can also go to a restaurant and see two people who are having a conversation, and once you start asking yourself, are they listening to one another, and zooming in on one, is she listening to him? And then asking yourself, well, is she listening well or not? And what are the things that she is doing or not doing that signify and send a message of, I am listening or I'm not? This will become fairly easy for you to start noticing. Another important part of that communication loop is what we transmit a bit more overtly. So it's not just making eye contact or sitting towards someone, but it's also in the micro-expressions we make. So micro-expressions of nodding when the other is talking, not a nod of, that's right, exactly, I agree with you, but a nod of, yeah, I'm listening, go on. Which is, of course, a cultural issue of exactly how deep a nod should it be, or whether that's the suitable move, or this might be a suitable move in other countries, or in every place that has its own language of how to do these things. But whatever it is, whatever signal you say to in order to tell the other, yes, I'm with you, more please, then do that. Also, little affirming and interested noises that we make when someone's talking to us and we say, or small interjections that we make. Oh, really? Okay. And whatever it is that we say as they are talking, not in order to cut them off, not in order to interject our own opinion or our own anything, but just in order to tell them, oh, right? I get that point was important to you, or that seemed to be a major important thing that you wanted to say. Or when someone says something that is a happy episode for them, we smile as they tell it to us, in a suitable moment. And when they're telling about how their puppy died, then it might be suitable to put on a sad face. Now, the most important thing in all of this, and this is, since this might all sound kind of automated and robot-like and faking, is that I'm not talking about faking it at all. The key to good, excellent listening is sincerity. And it's really not that hard to listen to someone whom you're with and really want to get in there and understand what's going on and be willing to intake what the other person has to say. The reason that we don't do it as much as we think or as much as we should is because we're concerned that if we let the other person talk for too long, then it's as if we're admitting they're right. We're giving them the stage, and therefore we will have to give away whatever they're asking us for in negotiation. If we can manage to separate in our own mind between those two, between how we're communicating and what we will actually give, then we won't mind listening to them at all. Because in the end we'll realize that only through listening to what they have to say will we understand in the end what we'll need to do in order to make them give us what we came here for. So they hold the key. And we need to listen in order to allow them to share with us what the key might be. Listening should not be a self-threatening activity. So get used to it. You can listen and listen and listen. You can empathize and empathize and empathize and still not give away anything you don't want to give away. So if you can create that divide in your own mind, that will set you free to be a sincere and genuine listener, and you will see that taking effect. Of course, once again, it's especially hard to do this when you're in a situation not interacting with a friend, but when you're interacting with someone who you might not like, or you might be angry at, or at least you're not liking what they have to say to you, which is often the case in negotiation. Let's see how that plays out when I tell my upstairs neighbor, Bernie, some things that he doesn't like. Some things that I know he doesn't like and he knows he doesn't like, but let's see how he listens when he's in that situation. Hi, Bernie. Thanks.
You back?
I'm back. Yeah, and thanks for letting me in after last night when you slammed the door in my face. Listen, I got to talk to you about some stuff.
Okay, well, I'm all ears.
Listen, I mean, I've said this to you before, but I gotta say it straight out. Your dog is driving me crazy. Your dog is barking and all night, all day. I can't sleep at night.
He's keeping you awake at night?
He's keeping me awake at night, and just as I start falling asleep, something else starts it off, and it's really driving me crazy. And I work hard all day, and I need my sleep, and I'm not getting it. And it's because your dogs. I need you to do something about it. So that's a really, really good example of what good listening looks like, even when you're in a situation in which you're not happy to be listening to it, or you're not happy to be in the situation in the first place. But still, you're sitting down with a counterpart and they have something to say, and you're listening to them. And we've seen those different kind of micro tools and micro expressions that we discussed about play out in the way Bernie was listening to me. Now, if the listening phase we focus on more micro tools, micro skills of listening and all the different ways in which we transmit silent messages of I'm with you and I'm listening, in the next stage, reflecting, we use more overt transmission tools in order to tell the other person, we have heard what you were trying to say, it was important to us to hear it, we are interested in hearing what you say, and we want to make sure that we've got it all right. In a nutshell, the reflecting tool is one in which we transmit back to the other directly, I heard what you said, I was listening to you and I heard what you said, and I'm going to demonstrate that and show it to you by reflecting what it is that you've said. I'm going to reflect it back to you. So we provide the other party with a reflection or a summary of what he or she has said to us back to them. Okay? Now, before we talk about how we do that and how we use that in negotiation, I'm going to say straight off that I know that some of you might be thinking now, well, why would I want to do that? And you're in good company. I mean, reflecting is counterintuitive. Why would I want to do that? So I managed to bite my tongue while the other guy was speaking, but do I want to repeat back what the other person has said to me now? That, you know, it's as if I would be validating what they said. I don't want to give it any more airtime. I don't want to hear it again, even in my own voice. What I really want to do now is I want to jump in and I want to give the other person a piece of my mind. I want to tell them why they're wrong. I want to correct the mistakes that they've made. I want to defend myself against the accusations they've made against me. The last thing that I want to do is to leave their message on the table and give it more time and even stroke it and you know, relate to it by summarizing it and sending it back to the other party. But here's the thing. Remember the communication loop and what we're trying to do now. We are trying to clear the noise out of the channel, and we are trying to make sure as well that things don't get lost in the encoding, decoding process, which I hope you remember. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to build that a sense of empathy, relationship, and trust between the other party and us, even as we're verifying that we've understood what they had to say as closely as possible to the way they meant us to hear it. So what we do is we do things in order to build that empathy, trust, and relationship by saying, look, here's your message. You know we don't like it, but we are going to relate to it. We are able to contain it. We're able to hear it. We respect that you saw it as important to say it, and we are going to deal with it. We are able to hear you and listen to you, even though we may not agree with you. And at the same time, we're going to verify that we've understood what they had to say, and we're also going to verify that they've said what they came to say, or said what they have to say, so that we know that they've, you know, cleared enough space inside them, and now perhaps they'll be more open to hearing what we have to say. Because we will have what to say. Don't get me wrong. We're not only going to use intaking tools in our communication toolbox. No, but what I'm suggesting is use the intaking tools first. They build those bridges of empathy and trust and relationship. They allow us to get the information that we need and to verify that we've understood correctly. And also, they allow us to kind of clear some space on the other's hard drive, which is overloaded with everything that they intended to say to us. We clear some space, and then maybe something new can come and fill that hard drive when we input information to them by telling them what our opinions, what our thoughts, positions, interests are, and so on and so forth. So, how do we do it? So very basically what we do is we repeat or summarize. There are many different styles of doing this, but basically we repeat back to the other person what they have said to us. And what is important that as we do so, we take note of several issues. One is that we repeat back the main factual issues that they have shared with us, the information, the data, whatever you want to call it, the ABCD of what they have come to say. But it's equally as important that we reflect back as well the emotional information that they've given us as well. So they've given us detailed facts, and they've also given us emotional facts. So if what they have told us is, that we were late with a delivery and they are very, very annoyed and angry with us and don't know what to do now. So reflecting that back could be saying, so I hear you saying that you feel I was late with the delivery, and I'm also seeing that that made you very, very angry. Okay? So we've managed to reflect back both the facts and the emotional facts of the situation that the other has conveyed to us. Another element that we might want to use is to use specific phrases that the other party has used in our summarizing back, our reflecting back of the story. So we don't need to do this word for word. I've used the terms reflecting and summarizing. I've not used the word parroting. So it doesn't have to be a word for word sending back. But it does help every so often to use specific words or specific phrases that seem to be meaningful or important to the other party, to capture those and use those when we're repeating it back to them. Because that's a shortcut towards connecting with the other party in sending back the all-important message of I've heard you and I've understood you. It's very important at this point in which we're reflecting their story or their opinions or whatever it is they said back to them, that we don't argue with them now. We're not trying to score points. We're just trying to convey that we've heard them and understood them. There will be time later to make our own case or to tell them why they were wrong. Every time that we try at this point to tell them why they were wrong as we're reflecting their story, we're just undermining our efforts to show them that we've understood them. So we need to walk a very fine line, because on the one hand, we don't want to validate what they've said. We're not accepting it as true. We have other different opinions, perhaps very strong opinions, about why they're wrong. But that's not what we're trying to demonstrate now. So if we say, so I understand you feel I was late with the delivery, you're wrong about that, by the way, I had it in ahead of time. And I also hear that you're very angry at that, and that's just a stupid emotion. Then we're undermining our own efforts to show the other party that we've understood them and our own efforts to build relationship and empathy with them. So if we can stick with, I understand that you feel that I was late with the delivery and that puts you at risk financially and you're feeling very, very annoyed at me right now, without trying to score points back and explain why they were wrong, I will achieve the goals that I set off to achieve in this reflecting. However, you'll notice that I didn't validate them. I didn't say, well, I was late with the delivery and you're right to be annoyed with me. I didn't say that because I might not think that that's true at all. So we're walking a line between letting them know that we've heard what they've said, but still not validating it. We're leaving ownership of their story with them. We're saying, you say that X and Y and Z. You feel that X and Y and Z, and I'm just making sure I've understood it. I am not coming and giving it some sort of official sanction or approval saying, yes, I was late with that. It was wrong of me to be late. You were angry at me and you were right. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying, so I understand that you feel I was late with that and you're feeling very annoyed at me right now for that. So we're not validating and we're leaving it their story, and certainly not our story, but not even the objectively true story. But this is what we've heard from them. We should also be tentative, because we may not have understood them as they intended us to understand them. So it helps to inject little phrases such as, if I understand you correctly, or if I'm hearing you right, or I also understood that you're saying, things like that. Make it natural, find the right words to use, okay? But what you're doing is you're kind of micro-suggesting that we're not absolutely sure that we understood what they said as they wanted us to understand it, and that we're inviting them to correct our understanding of things. So as we do that, so I understand that you're saying that you feel I was late with that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm also getting the sense that you're really, really annoyed with me right now, and you feel that I could have done things differently. So I'm leaving their ownership of the story and not accepting it as fact. I'm being tentative about my own understanding, and I'm kind of inviting them in to correct me. Now, this degree of being tentative carries through till the very end, where I will ask them, at the very end of my reflection, I will ask my counterpart, have I understood you correctly? Is that it? Have I gotten it? And by asking that question, we're asking them to correct us, or add information, or make micro tweaks to whatever it is. And if they choose to take that opportunity to make small corrections, then we're gaining valuable information as to what they intended. What we're doing is we're reducing the noise in the channel, and at the same time we're solving the encoding-decoding problem of communication by very overtly relating to encoding and decoding. So by ending with the question of, have I understood you correctly, we're asking them to directly relate, have I decoded that as you encoded it? Okay? Now, in practice, of course, this needs to be done in a way that's contextually suitable. We don't, sometimes this feels unnatural, sometimes it's counterintuitive. We need to practice it. Okay? Let's see what it looks like once again in a situation where it is counterintuitive, and it's a little difficult to do because parties are annoyed at each other. Let's go back to the situation with my upstairs neighbor, Bernie Mayer, and myself, and see what reflecting a message back looks like in this situation.
You know, I work hard all day, and I need my sleep, and I'm not getting it. And it's because your dogs. I need you to do something about it. And there's also your kids, man.
Well, wait a second. So my dog's keeping you awake, and nothing that I've tried to do so far has worked.
Right.
And that's creating problems for your work, or just in general?
Well,
life?
both my work, my life, my brain. It's driving me crazy. And then, man, your kids. Your kids, I mean, God love them, but, you know, the noise they make, and they bounce their basketball right over my bedroom, and they go galumphing down the stairs and by my door and shouting as they go. I mean, so I've opened the door, and I've been that neighbor, you know, the neighbor who has to say, kids, be quiet, kids, be quiet, kids, be quiet. Who wants to be that neighbor? Teach them to be quiet on the stairs. Teach them not to bounce a ball on my head.
My family is creating all this noise that is a problem for you, and you're being put in a position of being the kind of a grumpy neighbor.
Yeah.
All right, so what you're really wanting from me is to figure out some way of minimizing the noise it gets to you.
Yeah, you got it.
So that's one great way of using this tool, and as I've said, there are many styles, different styles of using it, and throughout this unit, as you'll see different scenes of different people interacting, you'll see different people using different modes of reflecting, but they all try to touch on some of those major points that I laid out as the important content of a reflection, and they are all striving to attain those underlying goals of building relationship, trust, and empathy, and sending them a message of, I've listened to you, it was important to me to listen to you, I really want to understand you, I hope I've understood you correctly. So, let's now put those two tools together into complete active listening. So we've seen listening, and we've seen reflecting, and we've seen how they work in the communication loop. Let's see how they work together, how it looks like when one person in a negotiation situation listens to the other party doing all the micro work of active listening, and then reflects the other party doing the more overt macro work of sending those same messages of, I've heard you and I've understood you, back at them. So let's see how that looks when I'm working with Bernie.
All right, so what you're really wanting from me is to figure out some way of minimizing the noise it gets to you.
Yeah, you got it.
Well, I hope I can do that, but a couple of things that maybe I need to say. Is this the right time to...
Sure. And you got something to say? Go ahead and say.
Well, one about the dog and the kids, and two about some of the stuff that concerns me that's happening at your place. One is that, look, the dog's a really important part of the family. Something's going on right now. There's a dog in heat somewhere around in the neighborhood that's creating a bark, and I really am not quite sure what to do about it, but we are working on it, and I will see if I can't do more. I mean, it's somewhat frustrating to hear all this not knowing what I can do. But the other thing is, kids are kids. I mean, they're not bouncing basketballs. They're running around the house. And it seems like no matter, you just want to accept the fact that you live in an apartment building where their families living. And one of the concerns I have about that is that every time our kids go downstairs, or I go downstairs, my wife goes downstairs for that matter, there always seems to be garbage bags outside your thing that smell. And that doesn't lead to a very family-friendly or person-friendly apartment building. And I'd really like to see something done about that. And I guess the other concern I have is, did you just get a new home entertainment system?
I got a new TV, yeah.
It's more than a TV, it must be.
Yeah, it's TV, speakers and stuff.
Because every time you listen to whatever you're listening to, and it's often late at night when our kids are trying to go to sleep, all I seem to hear through the walls is a bass, but it goes, bum, bum,
yeah,
bum,
it really has a kicking bass.
It has a
You gotta
kicking
love
bass,
that.
and it's kicking the ass out of our attempt to get our kids to bed and just have a reasonably calm evening in our place. And so that seems to be when you watch it, is late at night.
Okay, before I get into that, let me see if I hear you correctly. You're saying, look, man, you live in an apartment building. You live with other people. Kids are kids. Dogs are dogs. There's a temporary issue with the dog, and got to figure out how to work it. Kids are kids, and that's how it's got to be. And in addition, you're living in an apartment building, and you got to do things to make sure that you take note of your neighbors around you, and don't leave garbage out in the hall. Don't turn down your bass and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, you take care of your tweeter, and I'll take care of my woofer.
Right. I also hear you saying both in that and things you said before that you're not out to get me. You're willing to work with me on stuff, but I guess what you're saying is that I need to understand that this goes both ways, and you're not the only one.
Right.
Since some of this is me.
Right. And I hear that there's a problem with the dogs, and maybe the kids too sometimes. And there may be some things I can do about it, and I hope you'll understand that there's some limits on what I can do with kids, and that their kids are kids, dogs are dogs. And we moved in here partly because it was a place that we could bring pets, and that's always important to us. But I hear that you really want me to work on it, and maybe there's some ways in which we can have rules about play and where they are at different times.
So, as I've said, there are many styles of doing this, and you may have noticed differences between how I do listening and reflecting, and how Bernie listens and reflects, and that's great. There are many styles, and you will find your own style, and you will find more than one style. And you'll apply one style in one context and another style in another context. Remember the basics and play it out suitably. Reframing is perhaps the most complex and challenging communication tool that we're going to study in this unit. At the same time, when used well, reframing is the most powerful and sometimes near magical communication tool that a negotiator can have in his or her toolbox. In order to understand fully what reframing is, we need to take a few steps back and understand something very, very basic about negotiation that fits in very well with our communication loop. And is the simple fact that a lot of the messages that are communicated in a negotiation setting are not constructive. And very simply, we tell the other party many, many things that might easily lead us down a fighting path, and the other party might say all sorts of things to us that might easily lead us down a fighting path. And when I say a fighting path, I don't mean that there's anything inherently wrong in fighting. All I mean to say is that if we are looking at this in a negotiation perspective, then we didn't necessarily come here to fight. We came here in order to achieve a certain outcome, and in order to have that outcome, we have to have a certain conversation. And for that reason, we need a tool that is able to take unconstructive messages and turn them somehow back into constructive messages so that the unconstructive messages don't lead us down a path that will probably lead us towards disagreement, but rather we will use a more constructive message that might lead us down a path that might lead to agreement that is beneficial to us. So it's not so much about not wanting to fight, it's about we had a purpose when we woke up in the morning and came to the negotiation. And that purpose was to get something that we needed. We, as the managers of this conversation, we want to make sure that the conversational path we're walking down is one that at least has the potential to lead us from point A, at which we don't have what we want, to point B, at which we do. In order to do that, we need to make sure that some sort of constructive conversation happens and that we don't get derailed by a non-constructive message that the other person sends at us and we respond to. And responding to the other's message is a good place to start our exploration of reframing. When the other sends us a message, they have, to some extent, they have done what we call framing around what it is we're here to talk about, or what it is we're talking about right now. In other words, we said, I'm using these words to convey this message, this is where we are right now, and then my natural instinct is to respond within the frame that the other has provided. So that is often very unconstructive. Let's say that the other has just said, you know, Noam, you're such a jerk. Now, if I would respond within that frame, then I would respond perhaps, no, I'm not a jerk, or you're a jerk, because I would be responding within the jerk frame, okay? It is not always constructive to remain within the frame that the other party has provided. Not only that, the other party, even if the party isn't framing their messages with destructive frames, like, no, you're a jerk, they are likely to be setting frames around the situation, the conversation, and the point that are more beneficial to them than to us. For example, if someone says, you know, Noam, the problem is that you're always late. So the other has set a frame around this conversation of, we are here to talk about why Noam is always late. You know, honestly, I don't want to talk about that at all. I don't want to talk about it for many reasons, but mainly I don't want to talk about it because I can't win that conversation. Let's think about why. In essence, letting the other party put the frame around a conversation is like when you're playing soccer on an uneven field, or to translate that globally, you're playing football on an uneven pitch, and you invite the other player to choose which side they want their goal to be in. Do they want to be uphill and play downhill, or do they want to have their goal at the bottom and play uphill? So if we allow the other party to frame, we will be playing uphill for the rest of the negotiation. And that is not a good recipe for getting what we want. So what we will want to do is we will want to take whatever frame the other has put around our conversation, if it is a negative frame or a frame that doesn't work out for us, and reframe, by which I mean set a new frame around it and get the other party to agree to that frame or to continue to play within that new framing, which is either constructive for both of us or hopefully beneficial to me. What does that look like? Well, there are two major kinds of reframing, although there are many. Some of them are kind of micro, and some of them are more macro. And I'll say this just kind of as a foreword, and in the material we'll see different examples of it. But one is a micro. Let's say when a counterparty says, you know, Noam, you're such a jerk, you always say no. So if I would respond in the other's frame, then I would say again, no, you're a jerk, or probably I'd say, no, I'm not a jerk, and I don't always say no. And I'd be holding a negotiation in which I couldn't win, because the best I could achieve is that at the end of a long, tiring discussion about whether or not I'm a jerk, the other person might agree, well, okay, maybe you're not a jerk all of the time. Why would I want to hold that conversation? So what has happened here is that the other has sent out or set a toxic frame around our conversation. Noam is a jerk. And I might want to use reframing in order to detoxify the frame that we have around the conversation and hopefully detoxify the conversation. So if someone says, Noam, you're such a jerk and you're always late and you don't care about anything, I might say, well, obviously getting this on time is important to you. And what I've done by that is I've kind of set the toxic part about me and my character and my always and all of that, I've set that aside. I've still tried to identify what the kernel of importance here is, which is that he seems to really want getting things on time. And I've shifted focus to that. I'm more than happy to talk about his desire to get things on time. That's a discussion that I'm willing to have. I am not willing to have a discussion about whether I'm a jerk or not. So through reframing, I've changed the conversation from kind of a detour to a destructive path, and I've changed the conversation towards one that stays on a constructive path. So that's an example of a detoxification use of reframing. Another way of looking at it, or another way of using reframing, is to change the big picture of what this conversation is about. So if someone says, you're always late and you're ruining my business, so I can say, well, obviously having a good conversation about timeliness is what we need to do here. So what I've done is I've taken his anger and my counterpart's negativity and blaming it on me and framing, well, this is what we're here to talk about. I've changed the definition of our conversation and what we're here to get. So that's more of a big picture, a definitional reframing. And there are others, and we will see these. There are many ways to do this and there are many ways to describe it. So for now, let's join Professor Mary Lee Brock's classroom at the Werner Institute at Creighton University School of Law, and we'll see how she explains and gives examples of reframing and its different uses.
And we're going to be talking about reframing in the context of your communication strategies and how you, as in negotiations, in conversation, in difficult conversations, can use reframing as a way to change the course of the negotiation in a way that could help you achieve your goals, help you feel better or become better understood, better understand the person we're dealing with. So, with that, we have a frame. So we can't really think about reframing until we think about frame. So the frame is, we're all making sense of our world all the time. We all have our own views, our own history and experience and abilities and values and communication styles. So we make decisions of all of the information that comes our way, and that frames what we're talking about. So if we look at this picture here, oh, beautiful, it already has a frame, but I could zero in. Maybe I'm going to zero in on this little shore piece here, or this beautiful color here, or some cloud formation here, and that's what I'm looking at. You might be looking up here. So it's all about kind of the frame, and then how do we pay attention to that frame and potentially reframe, if and when appropriate. Again, this is something you kind of pick and choose, strategize. Sometimes it's right there in real time. Sometimes it's after you've gone to reflect upon the conversation. So we have our frame, and we might reframe. So a frame and a reframe. So when you look at this, what do you see? A face. What else? Colors. Yeah, we're all looking at the same thing, but yet, isn't that funny? We kind of, different things come up. It's like, oh, it's like a big glob of colors. Oh, somebody else might see some lips. Wait, there's a spider. Ooh, bows. I mean, that we're all taking in the whole world and making sense. And if we start having conflict around that frame, maybe there's a way to go ahead and reframe. What do you see here? Iowa. Okay? A house? Job. Sun. Iowa. We see a place. Corn. Tradition. So that's all of these things we have. We have a frame when we see an image like this. What do you see here? Delicious. So food, business, industry. What? So what's different? Aren't they kind of the same?
Front yard, backyard.
Yeah. Yeah. So rural, food production, farm. So I say that, and I have this in my mind. Somebody else says those very same words and has this in their mind. Might not make for the most productive conversation, right? Our frames are not intending to be so mutually exclusive, but they're the frame's kind of getting in the way of what we're trying to do. What do you see here? What's your frame of reference here? Sisters? They're in trouble. Time out. Displeasure, angry. Yeah. Yeah. So sisters, they're fighting, they're angry, they're in trouble, they're time out. A theme is emerging from this, kind of negative. So we don't see two adorable girls helping their commercial photographer dad with a photo shoot. No. But we could. That could be a frame. So there's a couple of different styles, flavors of reframing. One might be detoxification reframing. We're going to take a word, an image that's so charged, and see if maybe we could make it a little bit less provocative, a little less toxic, so the other person can hear it. Very carefully, we do not want to strip someone's true meaning. We don't want to devalue their perspective. We don't want to, in the immigration picture, all of a sudden say, like, well, everybody deserves to be able to live, all of a sudden bring into your own, you're not reframing by trying to win somebody over to your values. You're just detoxifying. Another form of reframing is definitional. Okay? I might be talking about popular support, and somebody else might be talking about central government. And how can we have a productive conversation if we haven't even defined what we're talking about? So the frame right now is too broad. It's too wide. It's food production, and then we have that pastoral, traditional view of the farm, and we have the feedlot picture. We're going to be talking about two different things. So how do we define what we're talking about? The definitional reframing. So we're fighting about Thanksgiving at my house, Thanksgiving at Dad's house. Yeah, that's a yes, no, on, off, both, and all of a sudden, unintentionally, my child becomes property that I'm fighting over. So define that. It would be, looking at Thanksgiving is a time where time with extended family and tradition is important. And then so I'm defining, rather than Thanksgiving it's a Thursday where we need to wear elastic waistbands. I'm going to define it as tradition and holiday. Okay. Yeah. Metaphoric reframing can be very powerful. We use metaphors in our society, in our language all the time. It ends up being some common ground for us. Instead of making all of these kind of more charged, dangerous comments about someone, you can say, oh, he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. That might say, oh, I better be a little careful about some trust issues. I might need to vet everything that person says to make sure it's really kind of going to ring true to me. So using a metaphor as a way to reframe. So we can detox, we can define, we can use metaphor.
So Marilee has done a great job of explaining the main uses of reframing and showing some of what it can achieve and how to use it. Now, let's get a bit more into the nuts and bolts of what it looks like and how to do it. And in order to do that, let's join Professor Bernie Mayer's explanation of how to use reframing constructively.
Hi, this is Bernie Mayer. I am a professor of dispute resolution at the Werner Institute at Creighton University, and today I want to talk to you about framing and reframing. One of the key challenges in dealing with conflict is how to establish effective communications, and in particular, how to take what are often very hard, angry, positional, or unuseful ways in which people say things, and hear beneath all these layers to what the real genuine message is that needs to be discussed and needs to be talked about. And that is what we mean when we're talking about the reframing and framing challenge. So what is framing? Framing is a way in which people present their concerns, their issues, their ideas, their problems, their unhappiness. And people can frame things in very useful, helpful ways, or they can frame things in very unhelpful ways. And so part of the art of what we need to deal with in conflict is to try to frame our concerns in a useful, productive, helpful way. But that does not mean framing it in a way that is always nice or easy or unchallenging. It simply means framing an issue in a way that it has the greatest potential to be talked about in a productive manner. What is reframing? Reframing is taking a message that is presented in a very unhelpful or unproductive way or difficult way or toxic manner and restating it to the speaker in a way that we really recognize what is underneath all the different layers. We put their concerns, their ideas out there in constructive, positive terms, focusing on the underlying interest or message, but without some of the toxicity that surrounds it. There are a number of important framing problems that we tend to see. Let's just consider some of these. One significant problem in framing is the way in which people use language itself. And oftentimes, people put in very toxic or value-laden words. They make demands instead of requests. They talk about thinking something is immoral and unethical rather than thinking that it is unwise. And so that's one of the problems we're often dealing with is the language itself. Another framing problem is that people tend to put things into positional or either-or language. It's either my way or the highway. It's either we do what's right for the children, or we give in to our own narcissistic need. We either cave in to evil enemies, or we stand up with righteousness. And that kind of positional or either-or language does not help enter us into a productive conversation. Another framing problem that we see is the global definition of problems. Instead of talking about a particular problem and how an organization is being run, we talk about our fundamental problems with the whole philosophy underlying the management of an organization, or that the whole place has to change. And it makes it very hard for people to constructively deal with the concerns they might have. And we also see the opposite problem. Sometimes people talk about very overly specific definitions of issues. I remember one time when I was a mediator in organizational conflict where initially it seemed like people were talking about how they said good morning to each other. And of course, that was a very overly specific way of framing what was really a problem in respectful communication among people. Another problem we see with framing is that people often focus on what cannot be changed, everything that went wrong in the past, rather than what we can do to make things better in the future. The heart of reframing is the understanding that people have very important things to say that need to be heard, that they want to be heard, but that they wrap these messages in very unproductive ways often. And so the heart of what reframing is about is helping people say what they have to say in a way that helps others to hear it as constructively as possible. Our goal is not, in reframing, is not to take away the very often hard feelings or difficult messages people have to deliver, but to help them say it in a way that maximizes the likelihood it will be heard. Let's look at some examples of how this might work in practice. And in a way, each of you can just think of some of the hard statements that have been made to you that you've been reactive to in your lives, but that you could also think about, well, how can you listen to what is underneath a hard statement to the essential message that needs to be heard? So imagine you hear this statement from somebody who you have worked with in the past on a project at work. Hell will freeze over before I agree to work with you again. It was torture the last time we were on the same team, and I won't subject myself to your arrogance again. Now, our initial reaction to a statement like this might be to want to let the other person have it and give them a piece of our mind and stand up for ourselves, all of which are totally understandable, and we may have to find a way of saying that seems unfair to us and it's not something that we want to have to subject ourselves to. However, let's just look at the statement itself for a moment. Consider two aspects of this statement. Take a look at this slide with the bullseye here. We can consider this a diagram of over almost every difficult or hard statement that people make in life. That there is what we could call the gem. And that is the real meaning of the statement that needs to be heard, that needs to be acknowledged, and that needs to be listened to. But that gem is wrapped in a lot of static that makes it hard to get to it. And in a way, the art of reframing is about removing that static so that we can really talk about the gem. But here's the key that we have to remember. The gem is not necessarily the nice part of the statement. So, for example, in this statement that I just read, part of the message is, I am angry, I don't like you, I didn't like working with you before, I don't know that I want to do it again, and I certainly don't want to have the kind of experience where I felt subject to your power before. Well, that's a hard message, but we can hear it and we can listen to it. But consider the static that makes it hard to do that. It's some very difficult language and words like arrogance, torture, hell will freeze over. Those are the things that shut us or other people down very quickly, and we can't hear the real message, even the hard message underneath it. The other thing that might make it hard is there is an implied threat here, and that makes it also hard for people to hear what is really being said. So think of reframing as the effort to get at the gem by removing some of the static. So how might we take a statement like that and reframe it? Consider the following effort. The statement might be reframed as, we had bad experiences working together, and neither of us want to repeat it. You did not like how I approached the project, or you as a team member, and you are obviously still really angry about it. I did not like what happened either. If we are going to work together again, we have to make sure that we find a way to ensure this experience is not repeated. Now, is that an effective reframing? Well, it might be, or it might not be. We can't know that in the abstract. We can only know it in terms of how it plays out in real life interaction with someone else. We might have gotten it right, but as the next slide shows, we might have missed something. What might have we missed? Well, we might have missed the intensity of the anger. It might be, no, it's not just that we had a bad experience. It was horrible. It was one of the worst experiences I ever had in my life, and I am really still seriously annoyed about it. So we might have missed the intensity of it. We might have missed the fact that it's not a generalized thing about how we want to work in the workplace life in general, but it's specifically directed towards a particular person, maybe us. So we might have missed the fact that it wasn't that we just had a hard time working together. You're telling me you have a hard time working with me and how I work. And we might have missed the absolute determination expressed in this person not to work again in these circumstances. So while the reframing might have worked, it might not. We might have missed something. If so, we'll be able to tell that. How will we be able to tell it? Somehow or other, in our interaction, the other person will show it to us. They'll keep repeating the statement. Their energy will still be negative. They will still look very agitated. If so, we'll have to keep on working on it. So let's revisit the concept of reframing in terms of the different steps that we go through. And it's not that this always happens exactly in this sequence, but it tends to work something like this. The very first thing that happens in reframing, whether we're talking about reframing in terms of being the person to whom a statement is directed or acting as a third party trying to help two different people talk to each other, the very first step is to listen to the statement, to really hear what someone is saying, to work to understand the interest or the message that is embedded in the statement. And then the next thing we do is we try to ignore or remove the toxic language from the statement that makes it hard to hear the essential message. We then restate the message, including the real issue or interest, in as balanced or as productive a way as possible. And then we check it out with a person to see if we've gotten it right. If we have, we're ready to move on. If not, we may have to do some more work on it. Effective reframing has the following characteristics. Number one, it is interactive. It isn't something that we do on our own and other people say, oh, wow, that was a wonderful reframing. I'm really happy to move on now. It's a joint effort that we work with people about. We work together with people. Number two is iterative. That is to mean it usually takes several efforts at refining the reframing or the framing so that we really capture the message in a way that allows us to progress with the communication. Number three is transparent. We aren't trying to do something sneaky or hidden here. We're very open about the fact that we're trying to find a way of stating what they have to say so it really captures their meaning but allows us to talk about it. Number four is it's strategic. Not every single statement that somebody makes needs to be reframed. And number five, it has to be respectful. And that means we don't remove the essential, even the most unpleasant aspects of the speaker's message. Instead, what we're removing is the elements of the statement that make it hard to hear the message. Let's just take a look at this slide on a formula for joint problem-solving statements, because this is what reframing often leads to in problem-solving, where there are two different parties. It can either be a third party or we could be one of the parties. One of the parties says something, that statement needs to be worked out and put on the table in as productive a way as possible. Then another party says something, that needs to be worked out and put on the table in as productive a way as possible. And then these two, in some sort of way, have to be joined so that we create a joint problem-solving statement that might sound like, how can the two of us work together on a project that we both care about, given that we have very different styles of work and different communication styles, but we want to be productive and respectful of what we each have to contribute, and we don't want to repeat the bad experiences we had in the past. That might work. If it does, it really allows people to go forward with a discussion that can be productive.
This is a very, very tricky skill to learn, and it requires a lot of practice and a lot of thought. It doesn't work all the time, and you just need to work at it, and at some point you'll discover that you're doing it well. But no matter how well you do it, you have to keep practicing it. So let's just quickly take a look at an example in which Bernie and I are engaged in a negotiation, and we'll see how reframing is used to change this conversation.
And I hear that there's a problem with the dogs, and maybe the kids too sometimes. And there may be some things I can do about it, and I hope you'll understand that there's some limits on what I can do with kids, and that other kids are kids, dogs are dogs. And we moved in here partly because it was a place that we could bring pets, and that's always important to us. But I hear that you really want me to work on it, and maybe there's some ways in which we can have rules about play and where they are at different times.
So you're saying maybe by working together on this as a set of problems, we can both, kind of learn what the limitations of living close to each other are, and also find solutions to some of these problems.
What we've seen so far is that reframing is a very powerful tool for setting the stage for having a constructive conversation that can lead to getting what we want. It's not the tool for getting what we want in its own self. Reframing is about setting the stage for the upcoming conversation. It's about clearing stuff away, clearing noise, clearing toxicity, clearing things that are going to lead the conversation astray, clearing that all away, setting the stage up so that it is clear to have that constructive conversation on, and also setting up the stage so that it is most beneficial to us to obtain whatever it is that we came here to obtain. We will use other communication tools to actually lay out whatever it is we've come here to say, and say it to the other in the best way to get the points across. But reframing is a vital stage for preparing the stage for that act. We're now going to discuss another communication tool called iMessages. In order to understand what an iMessage is and why it's a helpful communication tool, we need to go back to our discussion of the communication loop and the fact that in between my conveying a message to my counterpart and that message being received by my counterpart, the message goes through filters. And one of those filters is a defensive filter that all of us have in our minds, which provide the following protection. When somebody accuses us of something, or says something that we perceive as being threatening, accusatory, blaming, our mind shuts down and doesn't let too much of that message in. The mind then goes into thinking up ways to counter-argue whatever has been said, or just thinking of negative things about the party who said it, and all sorts of things like that. But most importantly, the message itself does not continue through to be processed in the more cognitive parts of the brain. And that is a very familiar pattern in negotiation, that we tell someone, well, you're going to something, you're going to give me this, or you need to do that for me, you're always like this, and I need you to do that. And whenever we convey messages like this, we are doing two things at the same time. We are saying someone about the other person, and we are diminishing their capacity to intake the core of our message at one and the same time. So, in essence, by using this type of communication, what is called U-messages, by using U-messages, we are playing against ourselves. So, what type of message might we be able to use that will manage to pass through the communication channel and the filter setup and the noise and find its way in to the other's to the other's cognitive processing, for the other to think about whether he or she might actually want to give us whatever it is that we're asking for? Well, one message that is particularly effective is, in essence, the opposite of a you message, the opposite of a shutting down, blaming, accusatory message, and it's what we call an I message. What is an I message? Well, an I message is a message that focuses, as the transmitter, I'm focusing on myself, on my own opinion, thought, position, emotions, desires, needs, and so on and so forth. And I am not focusing on you and your characteristics, your negative attitude, your faults, the things that you need to do, the demands I'm making from you. So we're focusing on ourselves, and we're sharing something of ourselves. Since I used the word sharing, maybe I should say something straight out. I'm not introducing a nice way of communicating. This isn't about being nice. This is about being effective. If we've seen that a you message shuts the other's brain down and doesn't let messages in through the filter, we're looking for a way around those filters and into the other's head. Okay? An iMessage passes through those filters effectively. They don't shut down the other's listening capacity. Just as an example, let's say that I'm negotiating with my landlord who has just notified me that he wants to raise the rent for my apartment. If I would say, "How can you raise the rent? That's heartless," chances are my landlord would not listen to much of that, to much of that message. It's an uncomfortable message to listen to. You have to live with yourself being heartless. Nobody likes being told that they're heartless, and nobody likes being told that they can or cannot do something, or that what they did or intend to do is illegitimate or wrong. So by saying that, even though I firmly believe that what my landlord is doing is wrong, and I want to convey that to him, I'm also shutting down his capacity to listen to me. If instead I would say, I can't imagine how my life would change if I would have to pay another $300 a month in rent. That would just be unbearable. So I've said more or less the same content. Okay? I'm against raising the rent. I feel very strongly about it. It would impact me in a very, very negative way, and I intend to oppose it. However, I've said it in a way that doesn't necessarily shut down the other party. Will my landlord necessarily say, "Okay, then now I understand"? No, of course not. Of course not. But I have said my first message, the message that I don't like that, I oppose to that, I think it's wrong, I have said that in a way that he has now heard, and now the conversation will proceed from there. A powerful element of an iMessage is that it doesn't lend itself easily to a kind of an instinctive or a knee-jerk no. So when I tell the other party, "You have to give me that," if he or she would just say, "No," that's a natural response to a demand. "You're wrong about that." "No, I'm not." Okay? "You need to give me this." "No, I won't." The no flows from the demand. It's a knee-jerk response to the demand. You messages invite a no. "You need to give me $500 more for the rent." "No, I don't want to give you that." Okay? "Here's the price that you're going to give me per unit for whatever it is." "No, I'm not going to give you that." There's a knee-jerk, instinctive, negative response to a you message. When you say an iMessage, you say something like, "I can't imagine what my life would look like if I had to pay more rent." It's not that the landlord has to give me what I want, it's just there's no quick and easy way to say no to that. "I can't imagine how my life would look if I had to pay more rent." No, it just doesn't fit. So in order to give a negative response to what I said, my landlord has to think about what I have said and then say, "Yes, well, but on the other hand, I want to earn more money on the house." That's a conversation that we can have. The landlord hasn't automatically discounted everything I have told him so far and just given me a no. He has processed what I said and engaged with it. Great. That's what a negotiation should be. So iMessages are very powerful in that they don't lend themselves to being brushed away by an instinctive, intuitive, knee-jerk reaction of no or not, or just being brushed away. Okay? Now, how do you do it? How do you craft iMessages? When you're about to put whatever it is you want on the table or raise a difficult issue, how do you craft an iMessage? I have my own quick and dirty way of doing this. An iMessage starts with the word I, and as I continue to speak, I am very careful not to use the word you for the next 7 words. Okay, so it's I plus 7. That generally is enough to guide my thinking into crafting something that is a real iMessage. And why do I say a real iMessage? Because obviously, if I use a fake iMessage, it's not going to have the effect I want. There's no difference between me telling someone, you're a jerk, or me telling someone, I think you're a jerk. That's a you message. Both are you messages, just as equally. However, if you start with I and are very careful not to say the word you for the next 7 words, I've found that I will very often be able to continue speaking even far beyond that, still focusing on myself, my needs, my desires, my goals, and how I hope to get them. Okay? So that's my quick and dirty rule. But iMessages, just like every other tool we're learning here, are a complex tool with very powerful effects. There's more than one way to do them, and there are more artful and intentional and mindful ways to structure and craft those. Let's join Professor Marilee Brock of the Werner Institute as she explains iMessages, their use, and kind of a recipe, a more developed recipe than my own quick and dirty recipe for structuring them and delivering them.
How do you, as a negotiator, embrace the wisdom and the power of an I statement in a way not to sanitize a conversation, but in a way that can really help advance your goals in negotiation and hopefully, a side benefit, advance the goals of the other person's. It's to help a conversation be constructive. The emotion might stay high, but it's helping, it's reconstructing the conversation so the other person can hear. So if you're in a place where you're being responded to with some defensiveness, a lack of movement, those kinds of things, then that person might be feeling blamed, attacked, criticized, and that could be from a you statement. So by you taking the pressure off the other person and bringing it back to yourself about the impact it's having, it can help. Those you statements, they can be intrusive, blaming, attacking, and they're manipulative. We really enjoy the notion of changing someone else's behavior. It is delicious. We love it. And a lot of times we'll layer in some teaching. While I'm changing their behavior, I'm going to school them. I'm going to teach them the evilness of their ways. I'm going to help them be a better person. But basically, I'm just going to be having them do exactly what I want them to do. So that's kind of the problem with you statements. And when you're hit with one yourself, wow, that's human nature, to have those defenses come up and the barrier, and that gets right in the way of our good, effective negotiations. I feel like you never cared about me and you never will. That's an I statement, I guess. What kind of a grade would you give this I statement? Thank you. Yeah, only because I guess it's an I statement because it starts with I, but it's not. When we talk I statements, that's not what we're trying to get at. We're trying to think about, how could I better communicate what's really going on with me, what's really important to me, in a way that the other person could hear it in a respectful and meaningful way. A big part of active listening, good communication, is we have to be willing to reveal ourselves and to be vulnerable. That's tricky to do in a lot of situations. Sometimes that's not a safe thing to do. So we're always, what I urge you to do in any of your negotiations and your communication, is that you're constantly needing to assess the situation. We're doing it anyway, but thinking, a lot of times we assess and maybe we're a little too conservative, so we put the walls up a little bit more, or we're just unconscious about it. So if you can think about, in this situation, in this work group, in this neighborhood, in this family, how could I effectively show kind of what's really important to me and be vulnerable to having that discussion? Well, part of that formula is actually thinking it through. At least speaking from myself, I don't think we often reject making I statements or being true to ourselves. We're just flying along, multitasking, kind of, we're in a conversation, but we're already thinking about 4 more things we're going to be doing in just a few minutes. And so really hitting that pause button, staying present in the moment, figuring out, who am I, what place am I playing in this, and where am I going? Now, realistically, do we have time to do that for every statement we make all throughout the day? No. So again, you can kind of sift through a little bit. If you keep in a bad negative cycle with somebody, or the stakes are high for a conversation, that's where you want to spend this time and energy and figure out what do you want to reveal about yourself? What vulnerabilities are appropriate to bring to this discussion? And how can I frame my language in a way that's going to achieve my goals and help the other person hear what's really important to me? So look at these two statements. You are preventing me from getting my work done because you have not yet given me the financial report. Think that's going to help you advance your goal? Or, I am really getting backed up on my work since I don't have the financial report yet. Which of these is easier to hear? It's a loaded question. I know. Which one's easier to hear? Yeah. That's easier for the other person to hear. So when I talk about vulnerability and self-revelation, you don't have to go back to, well, it all started with my mother. I mean, you just really want to get your work done. You want to be seen as a competent professional. You want to make sure that you're achieving your goals at work. That's the self-revelation I'm looking at, your vulnerability. But there's a little shard of vulnerability in there. You're needing to say that your own work's at jeopardy. What's a recipe we could use for an I statement? How could we actually just construct an I statement? So step one, set that context. Describe a specific action. State what you actually saw, heard, experienced. I don't have the financial report. That's a statement of fact. I don't have to go into all of my wonderful speculation about it, what that means. Being specific about place, time, frequency. So much breakdown in communication, as we well know, is because of a lack of specificity. The more detail we can provide is helpful to me. It's helped me sort through what's important, and it's helpful to the other person to kind of get a sense of what I'm actually talking about. And then avoiding those judgment words. Horrible, terrifying, disgusting. One of my dear friends she's a delight to go out to coffee with because she will tell me her running internal narrative. Well, what I was thinking on the inside was, and so that's great. So think it. You can think it. Don't punish yourself if you have these awfulizing, judgmental. They're, again, delicious, right? But it's what we do with that. It's going to bubble up. And sometimes we just can't resist letting it out and letting the person know how strongly we feel. That ends up being a little more socially acceptable vocabulary for our own vulnerability. That's what I'm needing you to think about for yourself. It's more socially acceptable to say that this person or that situation is infuriating, horrible, demoralizing, than to say, I feel nervous, scared, disappointed. It's easier to kind of go to the other, but it's less productive. Let's look at step 2 of the formula then. We're going to use specific emotion. Where can you insert your emotion, describers? You feel glad, angry, delighted, sad, frustrated, fearful, happy, calm. Again, you need to test that against your vulnerability level, what's appropriate in your setting. And how different these first feeling words are in intent than feeling words that really imply someone else has done something to you. Look at this second list. You feel ignored, manipulated, neglected, rejected, dominated, abandoned, betrayed. Yeah, we have a lot of feeling words that really they're kind of our feelings, but they're as a result of somebody else's work. So how can we distill it down to what's really going on with ourselves? The third step, why am I making this I statement? What am I trying to achieve? Tangible, concrete effects. Consequences either impacted me, like we saw in that example. You're not able to get your work done. So that's, by describing that, it can help move people along.
So there we have it. So iMessages are a very powerful tool for conveying our own message across the communication channel, through the filters, and hopefully lodging themselves within the other's cognitive processing capacity. Now, what might that look like in practice? So let's look at 2 different ways in which iMessages might be using. The first one we'll look at is using iMessages as a way to respond to things the other party has said. So here are some situations that a party says something, the other party will respond by using an I message instead of a you message. Let's see how Bernie and I did that.
Listen, man, you have got to do something about that dog. It is driving me crazy. I'm not able to sleep, and it just keeps on barking. Do something.
You know, when you moved in here, you knew this was a place that had allowed dogs and allowed kids. So what did you expect? You expect that they only allowed old dogs who were about to die or something? This is what you get in an apartment like this. Go deal with it.
Listen, man, you have got to do something about that dog. It is driving me crazy. I'm not able to sleep, and it just keeps on barking. Do something.
I would very much like to be able to promise you that I could do something, but I actually do not know what to do to quiet my dog down. I've tried a lot of things, and I'm very concerned that I'm just going to keep on getting pressure from you, and this is a dog that means a lot to my family. You know that new home entertainment system that you got? Do you know how much noise it makes, how much it booms at late at night when I'm trying to put my kids together, how much it's keeping us all awake and giving us all headaches? All you seem to be concerned about is the dog and the kids. You don't seem to understand how much you're invading our space as well.
Invading your space? I'm surprised that you hear anything at all. I mean, you've got your dog barking the whole time. I don't know how you even hear the stereo speaker. And the truth is that doesn't even bother you at all. You're just making crap up because you don't want to deal with the issue.
You know that new home entertainment system that you got? Do you know how much noise it makes, how much it booms at late at night when I'm trying to put my kids together, how much it's keeping us all awake and giving us all headaches? All you seem to be concerned about is the dog and the kids. You don't seem to understand how much you're invading our space as well.
Man, I really love that system, and I bought it just last week, and maybe I did get carried away with it. Probably not, but maybe I did. I'm learning how to use it. And yeah, I fully intend to keep watching my movies, keep watching my stuff. That's what I like doing, the privacy of my apartment. And I'd thank you to shut your dog up so I can enjoy my movies.
So again, there are many, many different ways of doing this, and you will of course practice and find your own way, but that's one use of an I message, to respond to a negative statement that someone else said, to respond to a demanding sentence, or just to use in any situation the other party has said something. Your gut instinct is to respond, of course, with a you message, and you kind of regroup and use an I message instead. Another use of I messages, and this is a use for which I messages are particularly powerful, is using I messages in order to raise difficult topics for negotiation. In other words, in negotiation, we might be faced with the choice of how to put a topic on the table. And do we put the topic on the table as saying, you're always X and Y and Z, and you need to A and B and C? Or might we, which will of course, as we've seen, will cause the other to shut down, to build up their defenses, to be thinking, after our third word, they'll be thinking about how they're going to correct us and turn the blame back on us and show us what we're wrong? Or might we raise a topic for negotiation through using an I message in the hope that that will actually bring the topic to the table for discussion? Let's see what that looks like.
You have that new home entertainment system blasting all the time. You must not give a darn about the impact it has on us. You have it playing when it is time for me to put my kids to bed, late in the evening when I'm trying to go to sleep, and you have the gall then to go and say it's the problem is my dog who barks occasionally. You're really quite the aware of what we're doing to you and totally unconcerned about what you're doing to us. I don't know if you are aware of this, but when you play your new home entertainment system, whatever movies or music videos, whatever you're watching late at night, I have a hard time getting my kids to sleep. It interferes with that, and it interferes with my own sleep. And I would very much appreciate it if you would at least consider that. And I would also appreciate it if we maybe looked at both of the ways in which the noise coming from our place is having an impact on each other, and not just what I'm doing to you.
Your dog is driving me crazy. You have got to shut that dog up. I think that you're not even trying to shut that dog up. Sometimes I even think you're making the dog bark on purpose. Your dog is driving me crazy. It's keeping me up at night. It's not letting me sleep. It's driving me crazy during the day. It makes me want to come up there and strangle it or you or someone. Man, I need you to understand, I really, really need my sleep. And I can't sleep when there's noise going on. And it's hard enough for me, just the regular city noises, traffic from outside, stuff like that. But when there's noise coming from the apartment right above me, it drives me nuts. It doesn't let me sleep. And then I screw up at work the next day, and I'm feeling fuzzy all the time, and I really need your help with this.
iMessages are a tool for putting our own thoughts, desires, input, demands, requests, persuasive actions, and all of that, for putting it out there in a way that it might actually find a home in the other person's mind. The iMessage is the tool through which we communicate whatever it is that we've come to say, whether it's in responding to someone else, whether it's stating our position or stating our interest, and whether it's raising a topic for conversation. Whenever we have something of our own that we want the other person to be able to intake and process on their side, we would be well advised to do that through an iMessage. So, use of an iMessage is a great way of demonstrating how we're taking responsibility for both sides of the communication loop. We're not only saying what we've come to say, we're also making it easy for the other party to intake that in a relatively unfiltered manner. So we're kind of doing some of the other party's work for them, but we're really doing it for us. That is the way to make sure that our message has the best chance it can of striking a chord with the other party. Taking use of these tools to the next level involves using them together in conjunction with one another. Let's watch a demonstration of how using reframing and iMessaging together enhance their effect. And one of the reasons that they do so and they work so well together is that reframing really sets the stage for me to deliver my message. Whatever it is that I've come to say, I set the stage for it through reframing. Once I've set the stage, I step out onto this prepared stage and I deliver the best message that I can. The best message that I can will be a message that is conveyed as an I message. And through this combined stage setting and targeted delivery through filters, I have the most potential for delivering a message that the other will be able to receive, process, and engage with. And if the other is engaging with my message, then I am leading this negotiation forward. And that is exactly what I want to do. Let's take a look at what use of iMessaging and reframing looks like.
I also hear you saying both in that and things you said before that you're not out to get me. You're willing to work with me on stuff, but I guess what you're saying is that I need to understand that this goes both ways, and you're not the only one.
Right.
And some of this is me.
And I hear that there's a problem with the dogs, and maybe the kids too sometimes. And there may be some things I can do about it, and I hope you'll understand that there's some limits on what I can do with kids, and that other kids are kids, dogs are dogs. And we moved in here partly because it was a place that we could bring pets, and it's always important to us. But I hear that you really want me to work on it, and maybe there's some ways in which we can have rules about play and where they are at different times.
So you're saying maybe by working together on this as a set of problems, we can both kind of learn what the limitations of living close to each other are.
Mm-hmm.
And also find solutions to some of these problems. I think that's great, and I would really appreciate it if you'd work with me on that. I'm finding this very, very, very hard, and I'm really motivated to get on with my life and something.
Again, it's just one way to do it, and there are many styles, but keep in mind, and as you practice these, start practicing these tools 2 at a time. Listening and reflecting. Listening, reflecting, and reframing. Reframing and iMessaging. And you'll see how that compounds and enhances their effect. The next communication tool that we'll learn is the tool of questions. Now, questions is a very familiar tool, and we all ask questions all of the time. But not all questions are the same. Not all questions have the same uses, and not all of them yield the same results. Now, this is something that we all know, whether up here or intuitively, but let's talk about it for a bit, just to make it clear why this is important for negotiation communication. There are quite a few types of questions, but there are some big categories, and I think it's important to lay those out first. And before we lay those out, let's focus on questions that are meant to really gain us information. Okay? Because there are other types of questions that are not intended to gain us information, but just to make a point or put something out there. Like a rhetorical question is not a mode of gaining information, it's a mode of persuading or stating your own point. So let's set those aside. We're focusing on questions that are meant to gain information that we need for the purposes of our negotiation. And the 3 big categories are open-ended questions, closed-ended questions, and yes-no questions. Okay? What are these 3 and how might they be used? So, open-ended questions are questions that you ask and you do not know the answer to. Okay? To make it very clear. You have no idea what you're going to get, and you leave it to the other party to decide just what information they're going to give you. So if you ask, how do you see this project working out? That's a very open-ended question. Okay? What are your ideas for this? There's a very open-ended question. Now, of course, the answer you receive to that question will be very different than if you asked, do you agree with my idea? Right? So that's a yes-no question. The first one was an opening up, expanding the conversation question. What are your ideas for doing this? And the second type, the yes-no, was a narrowing. Do you agree with my idea? Both of these serve their purposes, of course. And it's important to differentiate between them and to use them for those proper purposes. So when we want to open up the other, when we want to get them thinking about a particular topic, when we want to hear their general thoughts about a topic, when we just want them to get used to feeling free to talk with us and sharing information, when we want to empower them, when we want to learn about what brought them to the table and what's going on in their lives or what is motivating them in this negotiation, an open-ended question is the best tool we can use. An open-ended question, it shows that we're feeling secure in this conversation, that we don't mind passing over the setting of the topic and the airtime over to them. It shows that we're interested in them. It shows that we're interested in what they have to say. So it serves all of those initial goals of empathy and relationship and trust. It also serves information-seeking purposes. When you ask an open-ended question, you don't know the answer, and you're likely to learn something from it. So if you use open-ended questions and then listen carefully to the answers, like we've been learning to listen, there's a good chance that you're going to discover things you did not know, and particularly things that you need and that will help you in this negotiation. So open-ended questions are when you want to open up the field of discussion, expand the discussion, and give the other party a voice. Closed questions are narrower questions. It's when you want the other party to focus, when you want the other party to be specific. So an example of what color car are you interested in purchasing? We're not asking what are their thoughts on cars in general, what their relationship with motor vehicles are. What we're asking them is what color car they want. Now, there might be 100 answers to this question, there might be 7 answers to this question, depending on your view of colors, but there is a limited scope of answers. What color car do you like? Well, I really like red cars, but I would be willing to take a blue car. So we asked a relatively closed question, and we received specific information as an answer. We use these when we want to help the others focus, when we want to guide them into a particular area of information that we're interested in, and when we want them to clarify. When you say red, did you mean only fire engine red, or do you like other colors, other shades of red? That's something between a yes-no question and a closed question. If we'd ask, what shades of red do you like? That's a closed question. If we ask, do you like fire engine red? That's a yes-no. So there are different degrees of narrow. As we want the other party to be more specific and to clarify more and to zoom in more on particular specific information, we'll use increasingly narrow, closed-ended questions. Finally, the last type of question is the yes-no question. The yes-no question is kind of it's a narrow form of the closed-ended question because you're narrowing them all the way down to 2 answers, a yes or a no. Do you want the car? Can we shake on it? These are yes-no questions, okay? Do you agree to the deal? Is delivery on the 15th okay? So we've agreed on 450, right? These are all yes-no answers, and we use them when we use them mainly for 2 purposes, or we can consider using them for 2 purposes. One is when we want to pin the other down, put them on the spot, maybe interrogate them a little, and make a pointed focus on some issue that perhaps they were trying to evade or that they're uncomfortable speaking about. That's one use. It helps us kind of drag the other party into relating to a particular issue. And the second part is when we need the other party to be either very, very specific or simply to commit. We use yes-no questions. So yes-no questions also have very powerful uses in guiding the conversation. One general use of information-seeking questions is that, to use a tennis metaphor, they hit the ball over the net to the other party. Once we've asked a question, well, generally speaking, we shouldn't try to answer it for the other party, and we would do well to sit there and listen to the other party. But in general, when we're asking a question, we're signifying to the other, okay, now I would like to get information from you. So what we're doing is we've said whatever it is we have to say, and we ask the other party whatever it is we have to ask, and we're sending the conversational ball over the net to them, and then we might listen to their answer and reflect what they've told us and process that. So that's the conversational use of the question. In batting the ball over the net, we want to be thoughtful about which corner of the other party's court we want the ball to go. Do we want to make them run for it? Do we want to make this a hard shot or an easy shot? Do we want them to hit it back to us in a certain place or not? All of these will affect the way that we hit the ball over the net. So, having exhausted that tennis metaphor, we can take a look at the various types of questions on the slide here, where we see different ways of getting at what seems to be basically the same information, but we will receive different answers and different types of that information based on the type of question that we chose to present the other with. So we choose our type of question, our wording of the question very intentionally in order to get the particular type of response that we feel would be most helpful in this situation. I'd like to wrap up this communication tools unit by bringing us back to the beginning and reminding us of something I said back at the beginning, which was that each of these tools is very effective and powerful in its own self. However, their power when used in conjunction with one another, is compounded and enhanced. And this is something that I'd like you to consider to take out in practice. So you start off by practicing with them one at a time. You start off by practicing listening. But if you can use 2 or maybe even 3 of them in conjunction with one another, you can have a very, very powerful impact and at some point begin to lead the negotiation conversations that you have. I'd like to show you a demonstration of how using all 5 communication tools that we've learned in this unit, using all 5 of them together in a negotiation conversation can have powerful effect on where the conversation ends up going. And in order to do that, I'm going to invite you into my class at the Warner Institute at Creighton University, where I'm holding a conversation with Joan Sabat, who is a teacher at the Warner Institute, and she's agreed to have a conversation to me about something that concerns her a lot. Apparently, my kid has beat her kid up at school, and she is not happy about that at all, and she's come over to make sure that I do something that she finds very important on that topic, and I want to do something else. So we're about to negotiate about how I will treat my kid. Obviously, that's a hot button topic for any parent. It's a hot button topic for her, it's a hot button topic for me, so this is a fairly heated scenario, but still what I'm going to demonstrate in this scenario is moving through all 5 of these communication tools in a sequence. First, listening, then reflecting, reframing, using an iMessage to state my opinion of things, and then using a question to bat the ball over the net. And let's see what that looks like in a semi-real scenario. Over these past few sessions, we've learned a bunch of communication tools, and we've learned how to use them, and mainly what we've learned how to use is how to use them separately. In other words, we've learned them all individually, and we've practiced them in our minds all individually. And now, at the end, I want to just kind of plant in your minds the notion that if you can manage to use more than one of them at one time, you can up their oomph. I mean, they're all powerful, each and every one of them in their own right, but if you can manage to use more than one of them at a time, together, well, you compound their effect or more. This is kind of tricky. This is like 5th year at Hogwarts stuff. I mean, this is trying to being able to really use them all together is tricky. But you practice by using 2 at a time. And I'd like to demonstrate, and I've asked Joan to demonstrate with me, and we'll riff something and see if it works. You be angry mom, and I'll be the guy who's practicing this. Okay. Okay. How's that?
Okay. So I start.
And a scenario made up more or less on the spot. We've heard that our children had a fight of some sort at school today. Joan thinks that my son.
No, it's okay.
Joan understands that that my son has beat her son up or pounded on him in general. I don't know exactly what happened. We haven't heard details. We haven't had anything. Joan, let's say I'm Joan. I'm going to make up your interest. You want me to something. You want me to whoop my son. You want me to take care of my son. You want me to discipline. You want to make sure this is taken care of and seriously. And my goal in this situation, which I'll set for myself, my goal will be to calm the situation down and get some time to learn what happened and then decide what to do. Okay? And that's where we'll take it. And the way we'll do it is, this negotiation, which in essence is kind of a negotiation over action versus time, will be done with kind of reference throughout going through the 5 stages, and follow along and you'll see what this. Joan, you wanna kick us off?
So Noam, you're a kid. I don't know what you're gonna do about your kid, but on the school grounds today, I'm not sure if you pay attention to your children, but my kid came home with a black eye, and your kid did it. What are you gonna do about it?
So, if I understand you correctly, you're saying Johnny came home with a black eye, and you think that Tommy did it, and obviously, this bothers you a lot, and I can say, of course, taking care of your kid is very, very important to you.
Absolutely.
And I just want to make sure that we know all the details before we jump the gun and do anything on this. So I just want to know, can we wait till we hear from the school principals, from school teachers, then we'll take care of this?
I don't know if that's necessarily the strategy I'd go with. I believe my son, and he told me exactly what happened. He was innocently playing on the school grounds, and your son just came over and walloped him and said, "You're a cheater," and then ran off. And that was the end of it.
So you're
Black
saying
eye
you
on
have
my kid. Yeah.
So you're saying you have a clear picture of what happened, I mean, based on what your son told you. My son came over and walloped him, called him a cheater.
Yes.
Gave him a black eye apparently, and that sounds like something. I mean,
He's a real jerk. Your kid.
My kid.
Yes.
Okay. So and you feel that my kid is a real jerk. Oh, clearly you're angry.
No, I know
clearly
he's a jerk.
You're
Yes.
angry at my son and at me, and I get that, and of course.
Oh, and lots of other parents are mad too. And they think he's a jerk. They know he's a jerk. Sorry.
Yeah. No.
Keep reframing me.
I understand. No, and I also understand. I also understand that our kids are out there. They're out there in the world, and we can't protect them, and it makes us even a lot more anxious.
Well,
so
that's
we
not
want
what
to take
this is
care
about.
of things as soon as we can.
Yeah,
And that's what I'm
absolutely.
hearing you.
Yes.
And I want you to know that I also want to make sure that if my kid has done something wrong, I want to make sure that that's taken
Good.
care of. I also want to make sure we're taking care of the right thing and that we don't jump the gun. And that's the reason that I'm suggesting that we take care of this soon, but not right now.
Do you want me to bend
Go.
and break now?
No. Do you agree with me?
I'm willing to go and talk with school administrators if and only if you will punish your son in an appropriate way. Your little jerk in an appropriate way.
So you want to make sure that I punish my little jerk in an appropriate way, and that but more to the point, you want to make sure that if my son did something wrong, he gets what's coming to him, and assuming that will happen, you're willing to come and hear out school administrators or teachers or whoever was involved, just so we can figure out what was going on, matching the punishment to the crime, making sure that the right kid gets what's coming to him, and that everything gets done right. Is important.
Only then, yes.
And I want to say first of all that I appreciate your saying that to me, and obviously, look, I want to be a good parent, and I want to raise a good child. Okay, and no kid of mine will beat up some other mother's kid and get away with it. So I certainly promise you that if anything
I feel so much better then.
I'll take care of it. Are we good?
We are good.
Okay.
I know.
What I think did happen, and this is not a rehearsed piece, okay? What did happen is that if I had just listened and nodded, or listened, if I just used one of these, or if I had jumped straight to my iMessage and say, well, I want to tell you what's important to me, a different conversation would have happened. And something that did happen in this conversation, I'm kind of surprised that it happened, but that's because the power of this stuff surprises me as well, is that what happened in this conversation is that a real change was achieved in the negotiation between me and Joan. Now, you might say, well, what happened here was a kind of a win-win negotiation. I mean, everybody got what they want, right? Maybe. I don't know, and at the moment, that's not what's on my mind. What's on my mind is that I got what I wanted. And I think, Joan can do the math for herself, whether it's exactly that. But I think that what this demonstrated is that this as a sequence has the power to take a conversation from one place and channel it towards quite a different conversation. Did you see that? You see that happening? Go out and practice. Try 2 at 1. Go.
We have to be artful about how we use these, because if we only use one, people are smart. People are smart,
right?
And it
Let's not
feels
think we're
unnatural.
smart. Right.
It feels unnatural. What he was doing felt conversational.
And
I'm a horrible role player, and it felt conversational.
We can talk. The challenge, but just go the next step challenge, okay? How do I reflect that? The next step challenge is 2 at a time, okay? Practice 2 at a time. Go, folks. To be honest, even though I've been using these communication tools, and particularly this communication sequence in negotiations for years, I'm always kind of stunned by the power that they have when they're used in conjunction with one another and sequenced with one another. So start off by practicing each of them individually, and then see if you might be able to put them together. And when you are able to do first one at a time and then several of them together in real-life negotiation situations, then the amount of time that you've just spent in this unit together with me will seem like a very, very small price to pay for the gains that I'm sure that these will make for you. Good luck on that.